David's Bridal is by far the most popular wedding dress store in the United States, as they're responsible for clothing 1 out of every 3 women for their special day. Yet they declared bankruptcy in April of 2023, and this is the second time in only 5 years that they've declared bankruptcy. This raises a really interesting question. How did a company with such a significant market share that dresses millions of brides find itself at the altar of financial despair? Well, today we're going to find out. We'll start by briefly getting you up to speed on David's Bridal's history, then we'll talk about the macroeconomic causes that hurt David's Bridal and the critical mistakes that prevented it from flourishing in the modern competitive landscape that it finds itself in. Then we'll wrap up by talking about what is next for David's Bridal. Are they done like Bed Bath & Beyond, or will they be able to continue on? So if you like learning about the business world, click that little subscribe button and let's start with a quick history of David's Bridal, because it's essential to understand the historical context that brought David's Bridal to the crap show that has been the last 5 years. David Reisberg founded David's Bridal in 1950, opening his first bridal shop in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. In 1972, it was acquired by Philip Uti and Stephen Earlbaum, who wanted to expand the business. In the beginning, David's Bridal ran both exclusive boutiques and wedding dress warehouses like they do today. These warehouses focused on catering to brides needing affordable, designer-like dresses in a hurry. This approach proved quite successful. By 1999, the company boasted 1,445 employees, managed 80 stores across 30 states, and achieved more than $132 million in sales. But despite the high revenue figures, they had a net income of negative $415,000 because of their high expenses. Regardless of the low net income, they had an initial public offering in 1999 that raised about $104 million at a $300 million valuation. A year later, May Department Stores, the then parent company of Lord & Taylor, acquired David's Bridal for an even higher $436 million. Eventually, May merged with Federated Department Stores, which you may know from their flagship store, Macy's. A couple of years later in 2006, Macy's wanted to pay off some debt, so they sold David's Bridal to Leonard Green & Partners for $750 million. So as you can see at this point, David's Bridal had been pretty successful as a business, increasing in value steadily and bringing profits to each of its owners. However, the wedding dress industry began to change in the late 2000s in 2 ways. First, the lower cost segment of the bridal market where David's Bridal had positioned itself was becoming exceedingly more competitive. And second, high-end designers were beginning to introduce exclusive bridal lines that brides were willing to shell out major bucks for. In response to the higher low-cost competition and the demand for more premium dresses, David's Bridal started to try to move upmarket. One way they did this was by partnering with famous designer Vera Wang. Wang created a line of cool, yet middle-priced dresses for David's Bridal. The dresses in this line were around $600 a piece, which is way lower than the $4,000 a Vera Wang dress usually sells for, but much more premium than some of the $100 dresses that David's Bridal was selling at the time. So things looked good for now. 2 years later, Leonard Green & Partners made a $150 million profit when they sold David's Bridal to a private equity firm called Clayton, Dubier & Rice for $900 million. Clayton bought it through a leveraged buyout. Now I know we aren't at the present day yet, but in the mid-2010s is when David's Bridal's problems really started to mount. So we're going to stop the history lesson here and move more into the macroeconomic problems and strategic questions that David's had to deal with. David's new management team faced a host of macroeconomic issues. Problem number 1 was that fewer people were getting married. Marriage rates in the United States have continually fallen over the last 30 years, but the fall accelerated in the late 2010s. This fall in marriage is especially not good for David's because their profitability relies on a high number of sales to make up for their lower margins. The second problem was that of the women who were getting married, a larger percentage of them were spending more money on their dresses at an average price of $1,564 a piece. This is actually a problem because David's dress offerings tended to be in the $50 to $1,000 range and targeted a more value-oriented shopper. The third problem goes with the second of more expensive dresses. More brides wanted customized, personalized, and more individualized experiences, and the experiences at David's Bridal were not highly personalized or customized. This meant that more customers were shopping at smaller, more intimate boutiques rather than big box stores like David's Bridal. The fourth problem is that more consumers were shopping online for their dresses. This online dilemma faced pretty much every major legacy retailer in the 2000s and 2010s. And the fifth problem partners with the fourth. Because of the rise of the internet, David's previous stream of cost-conscious customers had more choices for inexpensive dresses, and many started ordering dresses from even less expensive brands they found through online research. You may think it should be easy to fix these problems as the largest bridal wear company in the United States, right? Well, sure, you can't control how many people get married in a year, but you can control the price of the dresses you sell, your online presence, the perception of your brand to a degree, and how personalized you make each of your clients' experiences. But hindsight is always 2020, and making these vast changes is much easier said than done. David's Bridal did try to fix some of the problems we talked about by investing in its online presence, which is better than a lot of other traditional companies did at the time. I mean, I'm looking at you, Bed Bath & Beyond. As for other problems they could actually address, it doesn't seem like they made any attempts at changing the culture of their shopping experience. This could be because they didn't recognize the changing cultural desire for a more intimate, personalized dress shopping experience, or it could be because they couldn't adjust their in-store experience to cater to it. Management was stuck in the valley of death on the pricing side of the equation. Historically, they had always succeeded by appealing to cost-conscious masses, but with the rise of online and direct-to-consumer brands, their ability to compete in this market was questionable. David's Bridal didn't seem to have a distinct strategic direction, and they went a little bit in every direction. Their low prices, strip mall locations, and a big box feel led to a perception of David's Bridal being a Walmart of weddings. This Walmart approach would have been fine if they only wanted to be a low price provider, but they tried to keep their low cost customers while also going after these higher priced brides. This ended up being a waste of resources though, because the most affluent consumers did not want to go to the Walmart of weddings. Instead, they chose small boutiques to shop at. By 2018, all these problems were just too much, and David's Bridal filed for bankruptcy for the first time. In the bankruptcy proceedings, they made agreements that significantly reduced their debt load by about $450 million, and Oak Tree Capital Management officially bought them. Now, before we go on, I just want to point out that like Yellow's bankruptcy, which if you want to watch the video on how they went bankrupt that I made on them, you should check that out right here. The road to bankruptcy is oftentimes paved with private equity, leveraged buyouts, and debt. And although having a leveraged buyout isn't directly the cause of their strategic shortcomings, the debt the leveraged buyout brought put a financial strain on the company, magnifying any decline in their sales or any other adverse business events. So if you learned nothing from this video, I hope you remember that if you or your firm is considering using a leveraged buyout or going into debt of any kind, just make sure you are very careful, because a leveraged buyout or any other sort of high debt load can make running a business or running a life much harder. Anyways, after the bankruptcy, things were looking up for David's Bridal. Things were looking good. Major competitors like Weddington Away, which was owned by Gap, and Vow to be Chic, which was owned by J. Crew, had closed their doors. But as with most things, COVID threw a wrench in the works. COVID-19 really hurt David's Bridal for a couple of reasons. The extended lockdowns that China's zero COVID policy caused meant that the factories that made over 50% of the dresses that David sold couldn't operate. This forced David's to rush to find alternative suppliers for dresses. And the combination of having to find new suppliers and airship many of the dresses because of the long waits at the ports led to higher costs and lower profits on the dresses they did manage to sell. David's COVID dilemmas didn't end there though, because not only did they have to contend with the supply chain issues that plagued other retailers like Walmart, Home Depot, and Best Buy, but also David's Bridal faced a massive drop in demand as weddings and quinceañeras were postponed and proms were entirely canceled. The wedding services industry's revenue, which includes dresses, dropped by a whopping 53.7% from $80 billion in 2019 to $37 billion in 2020. Now, you might think that even though the wedding industry and David's Bridal struggled during 2020, the boom of weddings in 2022, when 2.5 million weddings were held, which by the way is the most in 40 years, helped restore those losses. But even with the wedding boom, the overall spending on weddings didn't reach pre-pandemic levels, with 2022 bringing in $70 million across the industry, which is 12% less than in 2019. Post-COVID, there's also been a trend toward buying vintage dresses, renting dresses, or purchasing used dresses. And the post-pandemic world in general is far more focused on experiences rather than things. So couples are choosing to splurge more on the event side of things, or the honeymoon, rather than the dress itself. With the fall in sales and rising prices, David's Bridal has been forced to lay off some of its workforce, and back in April announced that they're going to have to go bankrupt again. Because they are a private company though, we don't know exactly how much their revenue has declined or how much debt they have, but based off their bankruptcy filings, we do know that they have between $100 and $500 million in debt and a similar range in assets. Luckily for David's Bridal, a bankruptcy judge approved the company's sale to Scion Investment Corp in July of 2023. According to the deal, Scion invested about $20 million into the company and will take on some of David's debt. Through this deal, they will close about 100 stores and cut about 30% of their workforce. But this is much better than the complete liquidation of the company. Scion seems pretty confident that they'll be able to bring David's back to profitability as the wedding market recovers. But without substantial changes to David's business model, there's little likelihood that this will actually occur. The wedding dress market is a peculiar one where there really aren't repeat customers. It doesn't matter that David's has been a great, affordable place to get a wedding dress for someone a decade ago, they have to get new customers consistently. For David's Bridal to succeed with millennials and Gen Xers, they can't compete strictly on price because the direct-to-consumer brands will win there. And if David's Bridal hopes to become profitable one day, they need to be able to compete with the boutiques by not just offering a lower price, but by offering a lower price and offering almost the exact same quality of service as a boutique does. That sounds impossible, right? Well, it may be less impossible than you might think. To understand, let's compare David's bridal market positioning to Southwest in the airline industry. Bear with me here, I know these seem completely unrelated, but it will make sense. In the airline industry, there are three general categories: full-service traditional carriers, full-service value carriers, and ultra-low-cost carriers. Southwest succeeds because it provides high-quality service with relatively low prices. Sure, you don't get to pick your seat, and you probably don't have access to a charger or TV in your seat, but you get checked bags, the staff treats you great, and the flights are really reliable. The flights might not be as cheap as Allegiant, but Allegiant makes you pay for every single extra, and you never know if your plane will actually get delayed for hours on end. Southwest is the Goldilocks for most people. It saves them a lot of money while giving them everything they really need. For many people, picking their seat and having a couple of extra amenities just isn't worth the additional price of a full-service traditional carrier, but they want something a bit better than an ultra-low-cost carrier. Although the jobs to be done in the wedding dress industry are slightly different from airlines, there are parallels we can draw. In this analogy, the boutiques are the full-price traditional carriers like Delta, and the direct-to-consumer brands are Allegiant Airlines in the analogy. And if David's Bridal wants to succeed, they need to find the center space like Southwest does in air travel. That means they need to get the cost of their dresses down so they can profitably offer a low price and give the customer a highly personable experience, like boutiques do. In the short term, if you can reduce the cost of the actual dresses, you can use the money you save to improve the customer experience. Creating an online dashboard with a survey that a bride can fill out before she goes in and assigning her a representative to fully focus on her during her visit is a great place to start. David's Bridal has been profitable in the past, and I think with some key strategic changes, they could be profitable again. But I want to know if you feel the same way. Would you recommend a similar strategy as I did? If not, what would you recommend? Or is David's Bridal just a dumpster fire and Scion is dumb for investing in them? Let me know what you think in the comments below. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.